Hello and welcome to another episode of Because Things Can Be Different with Liquid Group, a show that discusses all things business and design. In this episode, our host Cameron Fry will be chatting to design writer, presenter and business sustainability consultant Roddy Clark.
Roddy, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Yeah, under weird circumstances. Sorry we couldn't be in person. We actually don't live far away from each other, do we? But yet we're still on Zoom.
I know, right? It's the lockdown life. It's nearly over, we hope.
Yeah, it seems to be getting there, and at least not going backwards.
Yeah.
How's it been? How's this year been for you? Interesting?
Interesting, I would say. An emotional roller coaster. To be fair, it's, for everyone, it's been crazy, hasn't it? I think it's thrown things at us that we've never, ever thought we'd have to encounter. But other than, work-wise, I can't complain. It's been, it's been pretty steady. But yeah, there's been a lot going on, but all good. I'm healthy and I'm well, and that's the main thing.
I think we've all learned that that's very, very important. It's been a very weird year for everyone. It's been quite nice catching up with people because of this podcast and finding out how they've been doing. And I think, if I'm honest, what's been really interesting is just how much some people have been affected and other people have not been affected at all. And that it's been strange. We've been in a bit of a bubble because our whole business stopped out of nowhere, and all of the effort we'd made building this business up for 13 years, we thought may have just ended. And then slowly but surely it came back. We did some stuff for the NHS and stuff. It came back. And now it feels like we're in a bubble because we almost haven't stopped, because we're a manufacturer, we're allowed to keep the plant open with COVID safe kind of rules. So we've just kept on going. But we've spoken to some people where they've lost their jobs. It's just been very, very weird to try and keep up with all the different angles of it. Not just health, but like financial health for people has been a huge issue. So I'm glad that it's coming to the end of it. Yeah, and
everyone has been affected in some way, whether it be work or personal reasons. Everyone has, had a knock-on effect in some form.
It's been crazy. Well, my mum, I've just had a baby, and my mum didn't meet him until he was 2.5 months old because she's high risk, so she had to isolate. So it was that I never ever thought, when you think about having a child and someone meeting them who's your mum, you really don't think that's going to be a thing. So that was quite strange. And even then she had to meet him in my garden. So very strange. Anyway, we're here to talk about something that I think this whole situation, I don't want to talk about COVID, I'm bored of it, but it has highlighted something, and I think it's put it into the general public's mind a little bit more than anything else, because it's been such an impact globally, and that is sustainability, which is something you're a bit of authority on and very passionate about, and share my passion for, which is why I thought it'd be great to have you on here and talk about it. So I thought I'd start off with just talking about what we've done, how we do it, and then get your opinion on it, because I know that you have quite strong opinions in different directions on things, and it's really interesting to get that across for the people listening, and maybe it will help them understand why I started this years ago and why we collectively think it's important, and why the design industry needs to pay attention. And it's not, I know you're quite passionate about this as I am, it's not just a marketing ploy, it's a thing that we all have to pay attention to. So I know that this is contentious for a lot of people, so I wonder if it is for you. It's what I pitch to a lot of large companies, because we do deal with very large companies now, is practical sustainability. Now, what does that mean? It just means that we're not going to be militant on it, and we're not going to make them do things that are nearly impossible. Or, to be honest, for any company, it's normally cost related. They don't like it to be 5 times as expensive. They might accept 5%. Beyond that, they start wincing, and their care for the environment goes down with the price. So what we pitch is practical sustainability. So it's like, if it's practical for us to be able to do this and use this material, etc., we will. If it's not, we'll have to look at a slightly less sustainable route. What are your thoughts on this? Because I know that it's not the ideal. As a commercial company, we have to work on these remits. What's your opinion on this kind of approach that we've chosen to take? No holds barred. Don't think you'll offend me.
It's an interesting question because, as I say, firstly, I find the whole notion of sustainability from a business perspective, what I find interesting is that brands are feeling like they have to label themselves as something right now. And I think there's this whole onus on, we have to showcase how we're sustainable, why we're sustainable, and what we're doing. And yes, in essence, this is a good thing. But what it's led to is a number of brands jumping onto a bandwagon. But what you say, when we're looking at your message, putting forward practical sustainability, I think, if I'm right in understanding from hearing you just say that, what you're trying to do is showcase that it's something that you care about, if I'm right.
Yeah, it's also they can't work with us if they don't care about sustainability, and the levels in which some companies care about them is, for some up here, and the only reason they talk to us is because we're sustainable, and others are down here where actually they talk to us because we're a design firm that does creative design work. And that's what I thought was important when I started, was not make people compromise on the quality and the design aesthetic of a product. It just so happens to be sustainable. So that's how I built the business. So you can buy any of our products and not care about it. And I've got clients, I won't mention them by name, but we've built massive flagship stores for them. 4 years later, they got a new brand manager and they said, we need to talk to you, Cameron, about sustainability. Everything from this point needs to be sustainable. And I said, everything from the point we started working with you guys is sustainable. You're sitting on a chair at the moment, which is sustainably sourced birch ply. It's the blah, 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 blah. They were super impressed with that. So I'm quite proud that we can sell sustainability to people that don't care, because I care and we as a company care. That's why we call it practical, because we basically, if someone really cares about it, we go to the nth degree. We try and buy locally sourced timber because it's more expensive. Normally you can't. But when someone doesn't, we kind of try and make it as practical from a budgetary point of view and from a project point of view for them to swallow, because basically we won't work with someone if they just want us to do plastic. We're like, you're talking to the wrong company. And it's not because we're now a bigger company and we're more successful. I've been like that from day one. Made my life quite difficult from a finance point of view, but slowly but surely almost the market caught up, and now that's quite good. It shows that it's not a marketing thing from us. It's important to me as an owner. So what I mean is, I've had other people mention that, is practical sustainability a cop-out? Would you say it's a cop-out, or do you think more people need to look at it from this kind of, I believe small steps are better than doing nothing. And I think a lot of companies do nothing because they say that they can't do the big step, i.e. they can't run their entire place off of wind farms. So then they don't. They don't change anything. And that's what I've tried to do, is this tiny incremental chipping at that big problem and trying to get it to a small one.
I think it is small steps. It's a step at a time. Sustainability is a huge topic. There's so many facets to sustainability. Even the word itself is meaningless almost now because it's been so overused in the wrong way by so many brands. And I think people get hung up on how can we attach the word sustainability to ourselves. And it's almost about forgetting the word sustainability, because that's what people are attaching themselves to. And it's like, how can we make ourselves sustainable? And it's not even about what you're doing from that side and kind of how you're communicating. It's all about what you're doing practically on a daily basis. And it sounds like, you're inherently conscious in your mindset as to production, the materials that you source. You'll openly share where you source your materials from, why you use them, how much you use them, how much waste you create, the carbon footprint of the import of such materials. By openly sharing them, I think that's what's more important, rather than saying, we are sustainable. By openly sharing where you source your materials from, how you use the materials, by sharing that information, it's plain for everyone to see that you've got a conscious mindset to production. And this is where brands get really hung up, and I work with brands a lot on how to communicate it in the best way possible. And it's thinking less about the label of sustainability, and it's thinking more about actually just doing the right thing and sharing your journey. Because sustainability is a journey. It's never a destination. It's changing as we evolve, as we grow, as we learn. So, however much you'll label yourselves as sustainable, you'll always constantly have to change. So it's just about sharing that journey with your audience. And that's more important, rather than, as much as I like how you've labeled things practically sustainable, as much as worrying about that label, it's focusing on just what you're doing the right way And by doing that, customers, brands, your audience, and, you know, on a public platform, people will acknowledge that and see that.
Yeah, I think that and I think that it has worked for us in recent years where it's been fastidiously our thing, to the point we were almost known as that, and it almost, so we put sustainability on our marketing stuff right to the back a few years ago, because it was getting to the point where people acted like our design was getting pushed forward by the sustainability, and we're like, no, it's the opposite. Our design, our job in the studio before we go to producing prototypes is much harder, because someone wants to use X and they can't. We have to use Y, because I've just point blank, you know, it annoys the guys that work in the studio. Point blank, I'm like, we can't. We're not using that. That's ridiculous. It's just the most unenvironmentally friendly thing in the world. And like what I think what you were referencing before, we had a call before this just to go over what we're going to talk about. And you were talking about, I think you were referencing bamboo, which I brought up, which is got a massive carbon footprint. But what I learned quite early on in the business is that I feel it's our responsibility as trained designers. You know, I've spent an awful lot of time and money on getting trained in design, and then I've spent 14 years kind of trying to hone it. And I hope that I never can call myself, you know, down on the learning experience of being a designer. But I learned that I feel that it's our responsibility to, if we can make it cool, and how quickly, if you look at sustainability or environmentally friendly or less plastic, all of these things, how quickly turning it into something cool, like sustainable clothing or sustainably sourced cotton clothing, recycled plastic that's being come from the ocean. Now, it is a marketing ploy, but let's not forget, we live in a capitalist society, and most of the Western world that produces the most amount of crap or consumes the most amount of crap is a capitalist society. So if you can make it where it's people want to purchase it and part with their hard-earned money, I think then that gains more momentum. So our first product, I was talking to Alex before about this, was a paper bag light, and I met a journalist actually like yourself, about an environmental journalist, and they said, but aren't you creating a throwaway product? And I said, yes, but this is my answer to throwaway fashion. So if you throw this away, it was a paper bag light, it can be 100% recycled. The only thing was the covering of the cable, I think, and even that they started recycling now, but everything else was 100% recyclable. So my point was, yes, it is throwaway, because there's only so long you're going to keep a paper bag light, but it's very environmentally friendly to do so. So it was kind of my nod to disposable fashion, in this case, household. Where other stuff we do is the opposite. We want it to last 200 years. In fact, I've swung the whole company in that direction much more. So we're trying to create stuff now that if you wanted to keep it for 500 years, we've got some stuff going out to the Middle East at the moment. You could park a bus on it. It's just beautifully crafted, although we say it ourselves, but we've spent a lot of time on making it incredibly strong and well finished. So if you want to refinish it in 100 years' time, you could make it look like the day it came out of our workshop. I feel that that's a great way of making sure something's sustainable. Also making the design kind of timeless. This is where it gets really complicated, is not being too of its time. Feels like a great way of making something more sustainable, because it won't go out of fashion. You know, some 70s, I think 60s and 70s design products, although I love them, you can see why they haven't been as popular as, say, 1940s and 50s stuff, because that stuff, you don't have to have your whole house looking like a 1940s or 50s retro house to have a nice 50s lamp in it. Does that make sense? So I think that that's part of sustainability, is the actual aesthetic of the product.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, my challenge would be to you as a manufacturer, would say, when you create a product, are you taking responsibility for what can happen to it later on in life? Yes, you might be using a material that's deemed recyclable, deemed compostable. You might be making, you know, a product that can be repurposed. But if you're not educating your customers on how to recycle it properly, on how to, you know, how for that material to be composted, because, you know, we look at compostable materials. Most compostable materials can only be composted in a certain humidity, in a certain temperature, normally in a controlled environment. So is that route there in the local, you know, the local boroughs that you're selling into? All of these things, this mindset of responsibility and accountability should take place right from the very birth of a product. Before it's even been designed, you need to be thinking about these notions. And I think that's where I challenge a lot of brands and I challenge a lot of designers, is, are you thinking about what can happen to that product once the use of it has finished from, a consumer point. And I think, as you say, it's definitely about longevity, creating products for longevity, creating products that are durable, creating products that are worthy of restoration, using materials that can be recycled easily within the systems that are in place at the moment. Yes, there are definitely new materials that are being made that, recycling systems need to adapt for. But you mentioned, say, textiles from recycled plastics. For instance, for me, I advise for people, if you're not going to advise your customers on how to care for those textiles, most people will wash textiles in a normal domestic washing machine. What that then means that if you're washing a recycled plastic textile in a domestic washing machine, microplastics will still end up in the ocean. So you have to think about every material you're using with a meticulous approach, and it's really important, because if we don't do that, nothing will change, and we'll just create more problems, different problems down the line. And also you look at things like recycled plastic. By putting all these forms of recycled plastic into play, yes, it's creating a different form of use of waste right now. But in the future, we're looking at maybe an increase of virgin plastic to make way for more recycled plastic. So it's about looking at alternatives completely different in its entirety. So there's lots to think about with sustainability, and especially when we talk about materials. And definitely from a designer's perspective, it's about thinking about what the second life of a product or a material is going to be. And I know that's challenging, and you've got to look at the commercial viability of products. And this is the biggest restraint on sustainability right now, is the commercial viability of things and how much it costs and the affordability for consumers. And as you said earlier, it's about as things progress, as systems come into place, things will become more affordable and more accessible. And so it's thinking outside the box and thinking, how can we work with products that might cost more in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to have more impact and have more benefits and stand you in better stead to be more sustainable as a company going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the sustainability in the business as well, doesn't it? So nothing to do with just materials, but it's we're trying to build a business on a long-term basis. So I, as an owner, will make a decision that our profit margins will be slightly smaller because we will fund that new material, that new lacquer, for example, because it's just got hardly anything that is bad in it. So we can't put it onto the client because we're already at that bracket price that we feel that is all they're going to be able to pay or value paying for their business. That I'm sad to say this, not every business runs like that, and because we did consulting in the past, I can assure you they don't. An extra £1 off the top of their profit margin is a reason for them not to do it. And it's part of the reason we don't do consulting anymore, is because I've just getting massive blazing rows in boardrooms with, very expensive executives. And I'd be like, this is ridiculous. You're literally not doing it just because of such a tiny percentage. We've all got to take a moral responsibility. Sometimes it just doesn't make financial sense, but we should still do it. Walk away feeling good about yourself is good enough payment, surely, but it isn't for some companies. And I think they're the people we really need to push and also educate, because the money comes as well, because all of a sudden everyone activates off and everyone gets excited and realizes, it's not a faceless corporation. But sometimes that's a hard sell.
It's about thinking from a long-term perspective, looking at the bigger picture rather than what the short-term hit is going to be. And obviously it has to make business sense, completely understand that. But what I'm trying to say is thinking about the bigger picture, putting, the needs of humanity as a whole first, rather than your individual business is key. And that's, it's about coming together collaboratively and working together as a whole. And people, we've been very used to a society where it's every person for themselves, and everyone's fending for themselves and thinking about their own welfare, which, we are in a crisis mode and we have to look out for everyone at this point. Because if we don't, we won't exist on this planet. That's the short and simple answer. But people just don't understand that, because, we're living in the present, and it's very difficult to try and put that, across, especially to larger corporations who are making, millions each week. So it's difficult to try and convince people to change, but it's, as you say, a moral responsibility that we have to take on board.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of space for morals in business. And I think that's, if I'm honest, from a business point of view, wanting to go into business was part of that. I grew up and my parents were super kind of hippie, and we were vegetarians for many, many years and all these things. So I was brought up on this real environmental kind of kick without even knowing it was. But also something I wanted to prove is business could be a good thing. It could be like we always say we run an old school business that's very family orientated. Everyone that works for me came to my wedding. That was not a pitch. It's because I genuinely see them as good friends. That's also sustainable business, i.e. we're then building, then we work together. We someone's mum was ill. They had time off, etc. That's about creating that sustainability. It then makes it easier for us to spend a little bit more here and there, because it's not all just the figures at that point. Someone will work an extra hour. They're not even thinking about their overtime. They just need. So it all comes down to like the finite, and I think that can get confusing for some companies, because you need to find people that are invested in it to make it easier for you to be able to do it as a business, especially as you start, as we are, scaling up. You need to be really clever in making sure you don't just start cutting away the things that built your business in the first place, which is very easy to do and very easy to want to do. When financial pressures start coming in, all of a sudden you have to really sit down, and I have done it a few times, sat down and kind of reminded myself what this whole thing was meant to be about. What's the point in getting bigger if we just cut corners? So what I wanted to talk about next was part of my sustainable business kind of practice is keeping sustainability within what we're called craft for this conversation, but basically just old school skill sets that are terrifyingly disappearing. And when I say terrifying, I mean that I've lost 3 suppliers in the last 4 years because our generation, our age gap, it's our dad's retirement age. My dad's just gone, he works for the company, but he's just gone to like 3 days a week semi-retirement. And I didn't realise, no one warned me, that this happens every generation. Now, the problem with our generation is we're losing, like I've just lost a frame maker, a joiner, and their sons were going to take over the company. But guess what? They don't want to. One of them wanted to be a video editor because he could see the YouTube boom. You can't blame him. That's great. But for me, it's terrifying because there's so many skill sets that we've already lost. And I can see, if we're not careful, within the next 10 to 20 years, we may lose some serious skill sets that Britain, created, a couple of hundred years ago. So I know that you're quite passionate about this as well. So do you want to talk about some of the things that you've noticed? One, public seems to be more interested in it now, which was lovely, around the world as well. Have you noticed anything with popularity in that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I'm really, really passionate about, and I've spoken a lot about it in the work that I do. So my father was a china and porcelain restorer, and the restoration sector is massively dying out, and that's just one example. There's so many crafts that are at the risk of extinction. If you go onto the Heritage Crafts Association website, they produce a red list of endangered crafts, and it's actually scary to look at the number of bespoke crafts and skills that we're so close to losing. There's just 1 or 2 practitioners left in the UK. So it's such an important topic. And when you look at actually the rise in desire for craft, so the Craft Council's Market for Craft report, which they released last year, I think it was 73% since 2006. The number of craft buyers in the UK had risen by 73% since 2006. And that now is over around 30 million people. So when you look at the take up and the interest in craft itself, the desire is there and is coming back. So the need to keep these crafts alive is imperative. And this is something that I'm working on personally in trying to revive the restoration industry. And it's critical in raising awareness around these crafts. And it's also looking, and yourselves from manufacturers and where you might source other crafts, it's looking on how you can incorporate those crafts more into your business to provide the needs for these crafts to continue. And I think what I'm working on a lot is the educational side of it. Last year we did a crowdfunding campaign for one of the last furniture restoration apprenticeship schemes in the UK, and it had been stopped just due to funding. And it wasn't even a lot of money that we were talking about. thankfully, the community and the industry came together. We've salvaged this apprenticeship scheme, and it's being reinstated. It's being rewritten at the moment. We're working on that, and it's been reinstated as of January 2022. So,
oh wow, well done.
There are things happening, and it's really positive that this movement is taking place, and we've recognised it now, almost before it's too late. But we don't have long to sort it out. This generation of craftspeople are getting older. The younger generation, as you say, are not as interested, and the digital world which we're moving into has taken over. But we will always need craft. There will always be a need for these practical skills. And what people need to realise, especially young people, is that there is good money to be made from these crafts, And there's
I talk at some schools about careers where it's not necessarily academic. I'm dyslexic, so a lot of people then think that they're just stuck and they're only going to be able to work in a supermarket or something. I talk at some schools because I'm super passionate about people realising that, some problems or issues that cause huge problems at school, like dyslexia, all of a sudden become, they're my tool, because for me to do 3D and figure stuff out, and when we're in the workshop and stuff, I've seen people that have loads of trouble working that out, and they've got masters in design, where my mind just works differently. You ask me to spell my own name, I have to think about it. And that's why I've gone to talk to these schools, is to try and get them to realise that you can make a very good living and also have a very respected career in it. And I think that's what gets missed. It almost needs like a marketing revival or something, where people can realise that these craftsmanship, the thing back in the day used to be really cool. Like my granddad, he had a joinery shop and stuff. It was like, we're part of the Guild of Master Craftsmen, and that feels like that's something really big for me, to be part of that and being accepted into it. But it's because my granddad was. But that gets missed and people don't see it as important. It's like getting a gold thing on YouTube is more important. I love YouTube, don't get me wrong, but I do feel like some sort of marketing so kids can understand these things.
I definitely. Also, one of the biggest fundamental issues of the craft sector, the restoration sector, is that it has been elitist, and it has been it's been a very privileged profession to be in, because
not just those, the design industry. I mean, that's one of the things I've really tried to fight against is. It's people talk down to people that don't have a degree or a master's in it. It's like, what? They're the people that I don't buy half as much design as like my auntie and uncle who don't have degrees in design do, because they love it. So why designers have to talk down to people that don't quite understand how it's done? Or like you say, restoration in antiques, it's just seen as something that, it's unattainable, so you just stay in your lane. Where actually you're just deleting a massive surge in market sector if more people bought more antiques and restored items.
And in doing that, they're also, they're completely going against their responsibility of the industry that they're in. Anyone that works in an industry, your responsibility, especially in these practical industries, is to pass your skill set on and to pass it on to younger generations. And by not doing that, you are failing the industry. And so
that's what we think, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do with the restoration world, is to revive that, showcase new pathways for, students that may not have been able to access, the industry before. And also practical skills have so many, mental health benefits. It's rewarding, it's more fulfilling. People need to have access to these skill sets. So that's a huge issue that we're facing right now, is the preservation of a lot of crafts. And I think,
it's interesting what you say about the mental health thing, because the day that we moved our studio, we've just moved again, but the first time we moved it and we deliberately built a mezzanine that looked over the workshop to keep that connection between the designers and makers, and the biggest impact was me, because hearing machines going, looking out my window in my office and seeing the stuff come together that we've spent, sometimes we're a year away from design to actual production. I have a smile on my face. I'm smiling now because I'm thinking we've got an awesome job going out at the moment. I've been in the spray booth. I don't need to be in the spray booth. I love finishing stuff. And that, from a mental health point of view, and my director Alex, who's in charge of the production, the more we do, the better we get. The more hone his skills, the more happy we are. We're just taking a junior on, and you can just see his face. It's just like we're trying to teach him. Like, our passion is what gets us through. When you've got to sand thousands of pieces of wood, you need to love the fact that when you feel it, it feels amazing in the end. And trying to teach him that. And to be honest, the reason we've just hired him actually is you could just see a switch go off in his head when he sanded something back and then did a final coat, and he was like, oh, And you could see he kind of got it then, and then the obsession starts. But yeah, I'm massively passionate about trying to get people to realise it, because it's just a dying thing. Saying you're a furniture maker sounds super weird. So people say I'm a furniture designer, but they don't mention the fact they make it. And it was always a dirty thing, even at my university, where we had to make stuff to be able to pass our degree. It was part of our curriculum. Everyone used to say, including myself, I hate to say it, I'm never going to make it when I leave. I'm going to be a designer. And actually now, the bit that kills me is I'm constantly in conference calls and stuff and not getting a chance to go to the workshop and put the stuff together. So yeah, I think we need to get rid of that and get people proud to, use their hands again. It's everyone's got to be an executive now, and I think that's not a healthy way of being. Well, no, I'm glad. And it sounds like there's lots of stuff. I'm really interested in that Red report, because we actually do a couple of things. We use some craftsmen where our machine here, our CNC, will do what the craftsman does, but we don't believe that that's responsible to do that. So we still hire them because of that. There's a couple of things we've deliberately designed, a couple of projects that have like undercuts and stuff on that our CNC would find much more difficult, because he can do it. And we managed to win a contract for a large, shall we say, one of the largest takeaway companies in the world for a lamp. It's actually in the background there. And he managed to hire an apprentice off of that contract. And for me, it was like, that was an absolute win, because he was just a one-man band, and then he had enough work coming through us that he could then hire an apprentice and teach them how to do wood turning. And we could have just ended up using our machine. But again, it's being responsible as an industry participant, shall I say, where we decided that no, we'd rather have that guy making it by hand. And then you can genuinely say it's made by hand. Each one is turned on his lathe by himself. Yeah, it's just, you pick it up and it just feels different. It's something about it. Kind of the last thing I wanted to touch on, I don't want to keep too much of your time, but I know you've got opinions on this, and it's key to say that I'm normally the opposite end of this when it comes to central government involvement in it. I'm very much, I suppose, more American in it, where I feel like the government needs to take a step back, and we all need to just take fucking responsibility for our own lives. But that's been proven that we're not doing a very good job of that, in my opinion. I've got friends that, they don't care about any of this stuff. They're a builder or something. They're just getting on with their lane, and, they've got kids to look after. That's the famous excuse. Central government should take a bigger role in product creations and import controls to slow down the influx of crap quality products. This is my opinion. It's controversial coming from me. If anyone knows me, and they'll probably be surprised if they're watching this podcast, because I'm normally well against it. But I just feel like if we stop the import of really shite projects, and I've been guilty of this. I bought something for my house. I thought, that's an incredibly good price. I go and buy it. It turns up and it breaks within a week. That is the least sustainable thing. Bearing in mind, it's definitely come from the Far East. So just the carbon footprint is massive. Carbon footprint, if it came and it lasted, not as important. But the fact this stuff breaks, and we've all been there, I'm sure you've got some stuff where you're like, what was I doing? You wind something up, and it would have been great if it was made well. If you wind it up, it snaps off, and all of a sudden it's in the bin. I think that they need to do that. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know you are strongly, educate people and let them make those decisions. But what do you feel about the government's kind of involvement in it?
Well, 100% governments need to take action, a lot quicker. They need to understand that it's less about, the commercial prerogatives right now. And it's whilst there's an economy to uphold, and we're coming out of a recession with, coming out of a pandemic world. I think the recovery now of the economy over the next few years will reshape the future for years and years to come. And it has to be a green recovery. And governments play a fundamental part in that. And there's so much that governments need to be doing. But what I do say is that we can get really hung up, and it's right to, use our voices to protest and to actually speak out to governments, and that we should never stop doing that. But also what we can do, the biggest power almost, is the power of the consumer. And if consumer habits can change, and if we can change collectively, we then influence businesses to change how they're doing, because they realize that, there's a conscious consumer movement and they need to respond to that. And then if businesses change collectively, that then has an impact on larger institutions and governments, where they see that, there's a movement happening and it needs to be respected and responded to. So we all have a role to play. So it's a very difficult situation, because I feel like sustainability is a contentious issue. People are very quick to point fingers. But if we do less of that and do more of actually acting ourselves, and, you know, whether we're consumers or business owners, designers, you know, we all have, and the book doesn't stop with one individual set of people. It stops with all of us. We all have a responsibility. We've all played our part in it. So that's what my message would be. And I think as much as governments have a lot of work to do, we must all take our own individual responsibility, because, yeah, as you say, collective action can, you know, small acts each day, small steps towards this goal can make a huge difference on a collective level.
Yeah, I mean, something I think that's been proven with that is veganism and vegetarianism and stuff like that. Regardless of whether you consign to being a wholehearted vegan or a vegetarian, is cutting meat down is a lot of people, some studies have been done, and it's something like 75% of British people say that they are consciously trying to eat less meat, which, growing up with parents, I was a vegetarian for much of my life. That, I think, is really interesting. It's a small step thing. And I think that's a lot of the problem. That I've got friends that are vegans, and a lot of the problem is that they push too hard, that you have to do everything in one go. But if someone's never even thought about it before, them only having meat twice a week is a massive impact on the world when you put that into the millions. And I think you're right. Yeah. And then guess what? Companies have really paid attention, and they're popping up all over the place. And companies that have been slaughtering animals for hundreds of years and now all of a sudden investing in, you know, plant-based burgers, which I think, for me, coming from that kind of capitalist business owner point of view, I think that's really interesting. Like I said about making sustainability fashionable within furniture and fashion, it's the same with this type of thing. If we all start buying vegan or vegetarian burgers, even though we're not officially a vegetarian, it still pushes those companies because the profit margins are there. And unfortunately, businesses are, you know, follow the money. So I 100% agree with that. And I think that my issue with the import of poor quality products and stuff is just the fact that people are still doing it after all of these years, and the craft movement, and where people are really starting to buy once, you know, buy cheap, buy twice thing, that's really starting to come about. And it's something my nan's generation, she was telling me when I was a kid, that, you know, the problem with your generation, your mum and dad's generation, is it was the fast fashion, fast stuff where, you know, injection molded plastic started being made, etc. I think hopefully we've been around long enough now, and that's the shine's come off of that people are going to start realizing that you shouldn't really buy a coffee table 100 times in your lifetime. Like, you should be buying one, you know, our grandparents would have got stuff bought for their wedding, and they would have left it to your dad when they died. Exactly. And that is not the same as our parents, unfortunately.
No. And that's the nature of, you know, that's what we need. We need to be investing in products now that we can, you know, if you are buying new products, invest in something that will last for years and years to come. I'm a massive advocate for buying vintage, buying antiques that are secondhand, because, you know, inherently they're made better and they can last longer anyway. But yeah, if you're buying new, buy something that, you know, is handmade. You can trace it back to its source. You know how it's been made, and you know that you'll be able to pass it down to your kids and future generations going forward. And I think that's really important. And that small shift in your mindset as a consumer can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about the quality of stuff is 100%. We actually, just before I came on this call, we went to sadly, a company's closing down. I say sadly, I think the owner's retiring, so he's selling it all and sold the land and stuff. So I'm sure he's very happy. But it's sad that it's a wood shop. But the machinery we just went to look at, I mean, it's so impressive. It was made in one of them was 1936. And I grab hold of it and start pulling the levers on this mortiser, and everything just moves like the day it came out of the factory. Absolutely incredible. Where now we buy very expensive tools in our workshop because I believe in buying once, but still, even the best makes, like the Festool of this world that we use and Italian-made machines, they're still not quite as good as that. I mean, 1930, I think it was 37 or something, just before the war. Something like that. It was very, very old. And literally, you pull the lever and it just, the feel of the movement was satisfying, and it's that old, and God knows how many times someone's put, none of the paint's left on it, you know? So yeah, I think that's really interesting. And the furniture's the same. You can get some beautiful pieces. And if you like some modernistic stuff, you've still got like mid-century stuff, which is, you know, it can be teak, which, you know, we don't really want to be using teak too much anymore. It's not a tree we want to be cutting down. So buying it, you know, as an antique is is the best way of owning it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. And it is that small shift, and it's celebrating the stories and the history of things. And it's more passion, there's more personal connection to these items. And that's what we want to generate going forward.
100%. Well, I will end it on something that I found out to be very depressing. We've got a client that has a very large shipping company, and I went to the port that they run, and I was informed that the biggest thing we export in this country is empty containers. Now, if that is not a call to arms for makers, people that want to learn to be makers, anything, because our carbon footprint won't actually be much bigger because we've got containers with nothing in them. So let's start creating stuff, putting them in containers, selling them around the world, get that reputation that everyone, the whole Brexit movement, everyone wants Britain to be great again. Well, we used to produce an awful lot of stuff for the whole world. I think if we've got empty containers leaving the country and it's our biggest export, which nearly made me cry when I heard that. It's terrible. Yeah, We've just got space going out. Let's start making good quality pieces that can go around the world again.
And you think of there's the consumables of things like laundry detergent, soap. If you can buy soap pellets that you can add water to make soap in the consumer's home, which brands are now doing. Because the majority of products, things like laundry detergent and washing up liquid and things, the majority of it is water. So you're just transporting water. So it's about thinking about things differently, changing systems, changing mindsets, and just remembering that it's constant evolution because, sustainability is an ever-changing agenda. And
it's definitely worth pointing that out, actually, is that we are talking from the design industry point of view because both of us are in it. But as a consumer, if you're listening or watching this, you need to support the businesses that do this. And I'm not harking on, you don't have to go and buy one of our products by any means, but there's companies out there that are doing a really good job of this. My wife actually buys some soap and hair products that's in a tin that you refill, etc. But you got to support those companies because if they're not making financial sense, the person that owns that business will have kids and a wife, etc. You don't want them to go under just because not quite enough people are supporting them. So I do think from the consumer side of it, we all have responsibility as business owners and in design and manufacturing industry. But as a consumer, if you're listening to this, just go out and it takes 5 seconds with the internet now and just find those little companies, and especially if it's produced in the country you're listening from as well. Like, don't be scared of buying something that's made in the US if you're in the US, made in the UK. Seek it out and support them.
Shopping independent is one of the greatest ways that consumers can invest in the right brands, because most independent brands, they're open about the way that they make things. They're transparent. There's a personal story behind it, which is brilliant to connect to. It's more fulfilling from a consumer perspective to interact with independent brands. So I definitely would, encourage people to do that because it's a more fulfilling shopping experience for sure.
Yeah, 100%. It's about the experience more than just purchasing another item, isn't it?
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out, Roddy. It's been very, very interesting. I was warned by our mutual friend that we were going to have many different things that we agreed on and many things that we didn't, but actually most of it we both seem to agree on. So it's been great fun. And hopefully next time we'll be in person with a pint wouldn't be a bad thing either.
That would be a great shout, to be honest.
Thanks so much for taking the time out, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Cameron. I'll speak to you
soon. Cheers.
soon.
Thanks for that.